machen und so halten?
So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Dietmar. This is Susanne. I'm Moritz Stefaner. And together we run this workshop series that investigates a simple question. And the question is, can food be a medium? So can we use food to communicate information, to make statements about the world? Can there be such a thing as data foodification, maybe? And if so, what is its language? What are the intrinsic qualities of food that we can use to communicate? What's the vocabulary of the language? What's the grammar? What are the pragmatics, maybe? And what are the unique qualities this medium might bring to the table? Pun intended. And this is, of course, an interesting question because data is always seen as very abstract and cerebral and general and detached and cold and technical. And these are, to some degree, cliches, of course, but they're also true. So the whole process of data gathering often very deliberately involves abstracting away from the individual. Then, on the other hand, we have this whole world of food, which is highly personal, centrally rich, tangible, tied to so much really very human experience. But seems like the exact opposite of this whole world of data. And of course, this is an interesting contrast to investigate. But also food, it cannot be really seen in isolation. So if you just look at the individual ingredient or dish, you might miss a big part of it. And a huge part is actually the social experience around food and also all the cultural baggage and the reference context that comes with food. And this is maybe where it meets. So because a lot of communication happens around food and no dish and no ingredient is really detached from the world, but is always tied to this reference context. And food actually means a lot, but we don't use it consciously as a means of communication or even expressing data. So this is what we wanted to investigate in this workshop series.
Exactly. And it was clear from the start that we wanted to go beyond painting with food or like simple the creation of 2D visuals with food. And instead, we were trying with this workshop to really explore the qualities of food for expression and to see also which levels of complexity and expression are possible with food. The inherent qualities of food are many. These are just some, actually. Of course, you can play with the graphical and the sculptural properties of food, temperature of preparation, the taste is very important, texture can be explored, as well as, of course, the presentation and dining situation. And we will show some examples later. And not to forget also the cultural connotations of food. And that brought us really to the local aspect, not only of the food, but also of the data. So we decided that we wanted to create kind of site-specific workshops, that with these workshops we wanted to explore the local culture, the local narratives, as well as local cuisine, bring them all together in one experience. And we decided that we wanted to do it as a kind of collaborative design practice or design research practice. So invite people as participants to delve with us into data and food together. And we wanted to enable a real dialogue around these topics that we will find and build collective knowledge through this workshop. And we think that these kind of uncharted field can be explored best together when we all bring our expertise to the table and our own individual and subjective views. So here's this reference to subjectivity that we find very, very important in this collaborative research. So we developed this as a workshop format that can travel to different cities, and it has done in the past. We always work with local organizers. In this case, it was Northeastern University, with a local chef who brings in his expertise in cooking. And local data is a very important factor in it, and of course the local participants that change every workshop and make every workshop into a very special experience. And these are the places where we've been so far. Started all in Helsinki in 2012, and now we're in Boston, or we have been in Boston, exactly. And to give you some impression of the workshop, here is a short video.
Gastronomy lab at the University of Liège. They use state-of-the-art kitchen appliances. There's even a 3D printer for making chocolates. Arlene, a workshop participant, shows that data cuisine is even suited to somewhat somber topics.
Our idea is to play off the Belgian praline, this chocolate that you're never sure what's inside. And so we're making these small chocolate coffins, and we will fill them with various fillings that represent the ways that people die in Belgium.
Now it's time to put their ideas into action. To make sure the database dishes also taste good, participants receive tips from a professional chef. Arlene is creating the various fillings which stand for the different causes of death. For 6 hours, the designer from Antwerp fills pralines until they reflect the situation in Belgium. Now the pralines are waiting for their photo op. It's important to document the various data dishes before they will be eaten.
That was from the workshop before Boston, 2 months ago in Jean Blou in Belgium, where we had access to this gastronomy laboratory and could work with these fantastic appliances that were there. And you saw Aline explaining a little bit what she was doing. Her final dish was this one, Death by Chocolate, and it's actually a very delicious way to represent something that is not so delicious, which is death, you know. And also maybe a kind of oracle telling your fate. So she made these 3D printed chocolate caskets and filled them with 5 different fillings representing the 5 most common natural causes, causes of death in Belgium.
Not all natural.
Oh, not all natural, exactly. So, and she also, these kind of death representations are also very telling. So she really tried to come up with something that was telling the story through the materiality of the filling. So something that is very porous and dusty for example, respiratory disease, and something glibberish and red for cardiovascular disease. And in the end, we were like 19 people. Each of us had to pick one of the caskets and, see what kind of death we are going to experience in the end. So it had also this kind of lottery aspect to it. So, last 2 days we spent here with 14 participants, first at Northeastern University, and the second day we spent in the kitchen, and we tried to discover what are the kind of hot topics in Boston that people are concerned of, that people talk about, and what are the local narratives. And we brought 3 out of 6 dishes, I believe, exactly, that we want to explain to you. So some of the participants are here actually and can give you a little bit more detail later. So this is by Ben, Stephen and Anne, and they were interested in the unequal income related to exposure of pollution in Boston, and they created something with basically a kind of layered rice dish, you could say, as a kind of, three-dimensional diagram that you can read. So the white rice on the bottom is in all glasses is the same amount, and then the yellow egg and scrambled egg and the black rice and greenish substance, the pesto, differs depending on these factors. And for example, you can see from that, for example, the left one is the one with the rich households. Basically, people have a lot of money. They are not exposed to so much hazardous waste in Massachusetts than people with low income that have a lot of black rice. That is this exactly, and the income is represented by the egg. So a very readable and also tasting well dish. Very nice. The second one was by Jesse, Ben, and Joshua, and they were interested in working with food, on food, really, and basically they were interested in finding out like where food comes from and how much effort it takes to bring it to our table. So here the combination of ingredients and the distance they had to travel to the table defines really the dish's position on the table, which we don't see here in this because it would be too difficult to show in a photograph, but that's how it's supposed to happen, you know. It's kind of like when you have a long table, you would position the dish that hasn't traveled so far. For example, in this case, it's a kind of local gin cocktail with local strawberries in it. On the right-hand side, that is really a local product, and only together has traveled around 80 miles. That would be very close to you, whereas, for example, the last one in the row, which is a kind of tapioca pudding and a banana leaf, has traveled altogether 21,000 miles to get here. And the preparation of the dish was also more complex, and also the way to eat it was a little bit more complex. So that one would be very, very far from you when, presented on a table.
Yeah, and just quickly, two more results from the workshop. This one's Sea Chain by Lynn and Alex. They have been looking at the effects of climate change on fish populations and investigate the rise in lobster and the decline in cod populations over the last few years. So there are big changes there, and that actually might be tied to changes in sea temperature. And so they made cold to hot preparations of both of these dishes with varying amounts. So you could basically see how the cold dish, representing the cold water, contained much more cod, and the warmer ones, as water is warming, we have more lobster in the warmer dish. Basically, nice way to tie temperature, which is represented to preparations. And the last one from this workshop is called A Million New Friends. It investigates the prevalence of fecal coliform bacteria in the Boston Harbor water. And these are visualized as lemon zest particles in jello shots. So especially in summer, it's not really safe to swim in the harbor. And so it's a very thick, very polluted jello shot, and in the front here and in the middle you have the situation in winter, and the very back is the actual what would be safe to swim, but yeah, we are far away from that here. So just to give you an idea of what came out yesterday, we will continue to document that. From past workshops, we often enjoyed it when people actually work with taste. So here's a lasagna that represents the ethnic mix in Finland with a spice gradient basically through the lasagna. So on the left-hand side, it's in the 90s, almost no immigrants, almost no spice, very bland lasagna. And as we move forward through time, more immigrants come to Helsinki, bring their unique spice mixes. So here the cook picked individual characteristic spices for different ethnicities. And in 2011, we end up not only with a very diverse Helsinki, but also with a very diverse tasting lasagna, so you can taste your way through time. And probably the most indexical, we picked that one specifically for this conference here, visualization is actually if you use a glass of beet juice and you drink it, you can use that as a measuring device or maybe a tracer marker. Because if you observe your output closely, then you know how long it takes for the juice to travel through your system, so you can do your own measurements on your own body using food. No, so this dish investigated this relation between input and output. So reflecting a bit on, so we've done 7 workshops by now. So each city is new. We have lots of new people, and every time it's new. And reflecting a bit on what makes a good dish. Yeah, we have a couple of observations.
Well, first of all, communication. So a dish should tell an interesting story. Otherwise, it's also a boring dish. And it should be usually a surprising story, and kind of contains some kind of statement or comment in some way. And of course, communication is also very important within the group. So in this workshop only functions, works if people listen to each other and share the stories with each other, and then, create the dishes together.
Yeah, at the same time, if you make something super simplistic, it doesn't work either. So you need these multiple levels and really play with having an interesting content, but then tying the ingredients, the preparations you use, together with that content. And I think that makes this medium also so unique are these cultural references. So if you use potatoes, that means something. If you use lobster, that means something. If you fry it, that means something. If you cook it, all of this comes with this reference context. There's nothing neutral there as well. And designing that eating experience and the visual impression and tying that all together, it's very challenging, but when it works, it's also very unique and rewarding.
And then what's pretty important is that at some point in the workshop that you actually have to boil it down to the essence. That means, there is so much complex data out there. You really have to find that data set that is telling a good story, but also comes to the point. So that is, that you can actually transfer into something. So you have to to reduce the complexity to a kind of understandable level, you could say. Oh. Exactly. And okay. And of course, what's very important is that you create something that also has levels of meaning, and that data cuisine is really about creating more than just dishes based on data, but it's really about creating data experiences, and that's what we try to achieve with it. So we said it already, eating is a kind of sensual and bodily experience, but also a social experience, and very often that's what we at least try to achieve, is that data dishes can be a starting point for talking about the subjects that are transferred through or in dishes, stories behind the dish, you could say, and that it's a starting point for a deeper exploration into a subject or a deeper reflection on a topic. And so usually we do these workshops and then we end with a kind of with a kind of data dinner among the participants, but of course there are unlimited possibilities. You could also create data dinners on specific topics. And we did one event where we were invited to work with an NGO on a specific, that NGO that kind of teaches journalism in the Middle East, and with the people of that NGO we developed special data cuisine dishes that were then served in a kind of flying buffet and that really worked very well. So people were immediately talking about the topics and experienced the data through food. Yeah, some impressions.
Yeah, and that comes to that point. What's unique is, I think, really this, not so much what the actual dish communicates in terms of facts, but the association context we trigger, and also what happens afterwards in the conversation when you consume that dish. So in many ways, these are just triggers for processes to kick off. And in many ways, creating that workshop for the two of us is creating a situation where people get creative. So it's this facilitation aspect. And at the same time, preparing and presenting a dish creates a situation where something happens in your mind. So it's much less about what is represented explicitly rather than the constellation you set up there. And to us in the workshops, it's always been always tied together, this whole complex of people who participate, the local places, the topics they find important, the food they like. You know, it's inseparable, really. It always becomes this complex of food and culture and data and information. And I think for our participants, we have to speed up a bit in terms of time. But what is really interesting is that it's really hard to do, so it's a struggle. It's an impossible task, like to do a concise but rich data dish that's local food ideally, you know, and it's actually an impossible task. We know that, and it's interesting how everybody deals with that, but once you're through it, something cracks open in a sense of, oh, I could actually use anything to communicate, or I could read now everything, right? So I think something really interesting happens once you're through there. And what we sometimes get is like, isn't this a bit gimmicky? Can we just eat? You know, does even food have to represent something now? It's like, does data need to be everywhere? And we'd like to turn that around and say there is no such thing as just food. And here we're back at the traces. You can read everything, and you can also write the world, and you can use basically any medium for communication. And yeah, so this is what we've been investigating here. As just the last pointer, we're trying to open source the process now, so we try to write a little manual so it's not so tied to Susanne and me running these things. And so we're putting a little recipe for the workshop on GitHub. If you're interested in contributing or helping us open sourcing a workshop, we haven't done that before, so I don't know how that works. Maybe no, right? So if you can help us there, it would be much appreciated. Or if you're interested in running one yourself. Thanks so much, and looking forward.